Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Hello to Aaron Zaleski. Welcome back as well to Anne Bagamary of the International New York Times, Patrick Smith of the Africa Report, and France Inter's Claude Guibal. We were talking just before the break about the impact it's going to be having on Britain, the Brexit. What about over in Brussels, where the mood is testy? It's a bit of a mad scramble. And yes, there is a tad bit of resentment.
On n'est pas sur Facebook où c'est compliqué, où on est married or divorced, but not something between.
All right, then there the Prime Minister of Luxembourg marches off. Anne Bagamary, it's interesting because we've heard, two sounds. Angela Merkel saying, hey, let's respect the will of the British. Let's not try to beat them up in these troubled times. Mm-hmm. And the French saying, come on, you guys want to leave? Start the clock. And now we're hearing from the two leading contenders to take over as Prime Minister to say, well, we're no rush. We won't do it any time this year.
Well, I think that the Prime Minister of Luxembourg had an interesting point when he said it's either a marriage or a divorce. It does have that feeling. And one of the truisms of divorce is that when the two parents shoot at each other, they hit the children. So I think Angela Merkel is actually preaching something very sensible when she says, let's take our time, let's let the emotions settle down, let's let the swelling go down before we start negotiating what's really best for Britain and for Europe. But mainly, of course, she's going to be most interested in what's best for Germany. And what's best for Germany is probably going to be more Europe, not less. The leaders in Britain are probably also taking a wise course when they say, let's take some time and sort this out, because there are so many different options for Britain to either leave or remain part of the European Union in some way. It's going to take a long time to sort this out. Why is France being so, hurry up, don't let the door hit you on the way out? Why? France has some very strong interests in making sure that Britain is kept out of the European Union. France wants London. They want London's business. They want the financial services business. And France, actually, we were talking about the British leaders not seeming to have a plan if leave, and it certainly seems to be the case that nobody had a plan in place once leave was passed for how Britain would leave. Well, France has been doing some very serious contingency planning for how to attract jobs out of London, especially financial services jobs and other kinds of jobs, if Britain voted leave. So France is ready to go. They are ready. And that probably is why the French leader is saying, come on, let's get the show on the road. Probably the cooler heads will prevail. That's my feeling looking at it. Just because the complexity of the issue argues for calm. But also, this was a shocking development, and people who are in shock don't make good decisions. It's probably best to let everybody calm down.
Do you agree, Claude Guibal?
I didn't know that France was prepared that way, but that's good to know that at least prepared for something. But
those of us who are French are happy.
We always
to hear
plan
that.
ahead, Claude. What are you talking about?
But it's interesting to see how everybody is trying to gain time in the UK. Of course, you cannot. I mean, it's their own interest to gain time to negotiate, to prepare a framework for this Brexit. Also, they are already starting to exploit all the divisions between the European countries, between Eastern and Western countries, between France and Germany. Even with Spain. I mean, Spain will never negotiate with Scotland, for instance, because of Catalonia, or so they have plenty of room, to explore during those 2 years. And I don't know what's going to happen next, because I think a lot of options are still on the table. Now we are assisting a turmoil, a mess, but who knows what's going to happen.
You mentioned Spain's, that was quite evident on Wednesday over in Brussels. The First Minister of Scotland meeting with the President of the European Commission, but the head of the European Council, who reports to the head of states, wanted no part of Nicola Sturgeon. And that's partly down to what Mariano Rajoy had to say.
Scotland does not have the power to negotiate with the EU. Spain opposes any negotiation by anyone other than the government of the United Kingdom. And I am entirely convinced that everyone agrees with us on this.
By the way, I'll open a parenthesis, then quickly close it. Spain had a general election last Sunday. Only
That's right. Like everything else in the last 7 days, it was ignored.
But on this point, you were mentioning at the outset, you wondered about a breakup of Great Britain.
Yeah, I mean,
Mariano Rajoy, did he just give you your answer? No.
No, I don't think he did, because after all, he doesn't speak for all of the remaining 27 members. I think there is a differentiated attitude. I mean, this country, France, has very strong ties with Scotland and might well find there's a reason to encourage it. No, I think it's a real problem. The Scottish view is very much we're getting alienated from Westminster, and this decision just takes it further. I think they have to make some hard decisions, obviously, about the price of oil and things like that. If they're going to have a viable economy. But I mean, and if they do stay in the EU, you're going to find a lot of Sassenachs, that is, people living south of the border in Scotland, moving to Edinburgh to get their Scottish passports.
Brexit really is dominating everything. We saw this Friday news that out of Austria, Aaron Zaleski, that there's going to be a redo of the presidential election back in May, where the Greens candidate beat out the far right by just 30,000 votes. When we were speaking with our correspondent, all the speculation was, how is the Brexit vote going to influence the presidential election when they have a redo of that runoff? So there really is this feeling that Brexit's going to impact everything that happens in Europe.
Everything. Another interesting thing I was reading in the French press this week is that some French politicians are not campaigning for, but discussing possibly rolling back the 2K agreement from 2003, which the cooperation regarding migration between France and the UK. And it's ironic because there was so much anti-migrant sentiment in the Leave campaign. And if this agreement is over, France will no longer be responsible for preventing migrants illegally crossing the channel into the UK. So I thought that was, if that dissolves, that's another complication.
On the other hand, we saw David Cameron in France this Friday for the commemorations of the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme. And originally, the French president wasn't scheduled to be there. He made a point of going. It was in your. What does that tell you?
I think just maybe a nod of support for the outgoing prime minister.
Claude Guibal?
The way I took it.
I think it's a very strong symbol of what Europe should mean after World War I and World War II. I mean, Europe, the idea of Europe is so meaningful for us. I mean, it took millions of people were being killed during these wars. And when I was a kid, the first time I voted was for the Maastricht Treaty. Yeah. That was the first time ever I entered a poll station. And I'm the kind of young European who has, brought with this idea of Europe that it was the only solution that prevented us to be at war for more than 80 years, 70 years.
A lot of people are making that point, at the parallels where we are now, the run-up to the First World War, which was a succession of idiotic actions and mistakes building on mistakes, is exactly how these sorts of international crises develop. And, we seem to be in this mode around Europe, but, take full responsibility here as a British citizen. This is a huge, unpredicted, unforecast mistake, which is leading to further mistakes.
And very briefly, Patrick, you mentioned at the outset that there could be even an impact on Africa?
Well, there's an impact on all developing markets. And that is, there's going to be a shrinking, certainly of the GDP of the United Kingdom. But I would also venture to suggest also a GDP of the entire European Union. Those are markets where the flour exporters of Kenya are selling into, where South Africa has a massive market in Europe. I mean, I've seen predictions of South Africa losing 0.1% of GDP as a result of this, which, doesn't sound like it's very significant for how South Africa is at the moment. Ditto in Asia. I mean, there's also the effect of how seriously can we take Europe, which is also going to concentrate the minds of the 27, how they deal with Britain, because they do have to get back into the international game and reassert their seriousness. And I think the big economies in Asia are having question marks about that at the moment.
Well, let's look at some of the other items in the news that happened this week. 44 killed, but it could have been a lot worse. 3 suicide bombers at Istanbul Airport Tuesday managed to break in to the main terminal, but thanks to the vigilance of a plainclothes security official, they never made it to the ticket counter like the ones in Brussels. Authorities blaming the attack on ISIS.
You have seen what happened at the airport lately. It was most likely done by the Islamic State group. They say that they've done this attack in the name of Islam. They have no connection to Islam. Their place is in hell.
And Baghamari, this is at Europe's 3rd busiest airport.
Yeah, which was news to me. I didn't realize that Ataturk was that big of a crossroads. However, Turkey has been a crossroads of a certain kind for some years, a crossroads for jihadists trying to get to Syria especially, but also into Iraq. And a lot of people are saying, including people in my paper, the International New York Times, that these are the chickens coming home to roost for Turkey, having not essentially given aid and comfort to jihadists, but perhaps having not been as vigilant as it could have been.
And do you feel as though Turkey's authorities have heard the wake-up call now? Because it's been a spectacular week diplomatically, with the restoring of ties with Israel. This Friday, the foreign minister meeting his Russian counterpart in Moscow.
Sure, and a lot of people are saying that Erdogan needs to do more of that. Turkey needs to do more of that. It needs friends now. One of the reasons that ISIL is thought to be behind this attack is because Turkey had recently been pulling back on its support of Islamic State and reinforcing its ties with the enemies of Islamic State, including the United States. So if this is payback for that, there are a lot of commentators saying Erdogan needs to continue to move in that direction and shore up its alliances with people who will help it combat ISIS.
And the Turkish prime minister, the day after the attack, saying he'd like to normalize ties with Egypt.
Yeah, well, obviously, Turkey is now in a new strategy. You know, Turkey is very vulnerable, as it has never been before, because it has been increasingly isolated on the international scene. It's divided inside, polarized, and now Erdogan is trying to take another step in a more regional strategy. Restoring ties with Israel is very helpful for both of them. They are two very isolated countries in the Middle East. They are deeply seeking allies. If you have to put that in the context of the rise of Iran in the region. So basically, Turkey and Israel have common interest for that. The move towards Russia is very, very is a very interesting move. As you know, Turkey and Russia were very strong commercial
partners until that fighter jet was shot down last November at the Syrian border.
And now, Erdogan is seeking new allies. Erdogan knows that he cannot fight two enemies at the same time, PKK and ISIL, and being alone that way. So now there is a new move. I think he heard the wake-up call, but what is he going to do, He has proven to be quite unpredictable and getting more and more authoritarian and more dictatorial. But he knows that he has to rebuild ties with the international community, because now Turkey is in a very, very, very bad position.
Patrick Smith?
Oh, yeah, I think he's made a pretty crude calculation. His popularity is based on his economic record, and there's no question under his rule, the last 10, 15 years, Turkish economy has been turned around, modernized, and so on. It's beginning to lose momentum because of breaking off that. Again, with the gas supply, he needs gas for a start, and that gas is either going to come from Russia or it's going to come from Israel, or both, preferably. So he's got a little bit of leeway. So I think, it's a very pragmatic decision on his part to maintain that economic momentum. And it's interesting that he's sacrificing some of his ideological shibboleths in getting back together with Israel, and no less than Vladimir Putin. I think one final point on that. I mean, he does, in so many ways, he's the sole brother of Vladimir Putin, is the sole brother of Bibi Netanyahu. I can't think of three guys who deserve each other more.
Aaron Zaleski?
Oh, there's also been so much of a focus on the PKK, that insurgency in the southeastern region, that I think that it's possible that because the focus was there, the ISIL threat was maybe not that
a second priority.
Exactly,
it
wasn't the top priority, and I think now in the wake of this attack, it may become more of a top priority.
His inauguration speech was toned down, but hours later Thursday, the new president of the Philippines was back at it. Rodrigo Duterte, the populist former mayor of Davao, reiterating his pledge to crack down on corruption and crime, singling out both drug dealers and their clients.
There are addicts in your midst, and you can be the one to kill them. If they're someone else's children, you kill them, so it will not be that painful. You need to do this first, because it will happen anyway. They'll end up dead.
Ambag Ameri, you were talking earlier about populism and how in America it's a topical issue in a presidential election year. Some have likened him to calling him the Filipino Donald Trump, although it's a bit of a stretch, perhaps.
Well, I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of people they're populist leaders, if you like, who are going to now be likened to Donald Trump. One thing that struck me about Duterte as I was reading in more about him today is that he is his power base is as the mayor of a town called Davao, which I think I'm mispronouncing, but it's in the southern part of it's quite far away from Manila, and he's going to be staying there, I understand, now that he's been inaugurated. He's not going to spend as much time in Manila. He is quite beloved in his town. He apparently has a reputation of having run his town very, very well. It's a strict place. There's no smoking. There are strict curfews for kids. There's no drinking after 1 a.m. And the people of the town like it that way. They're happy with all the rules that this daddy mayor has. So I think one way in which the Trump analogy breaks down is that while Duterte gets good points, gets strong points for being a good manager of his particular business, which is politics, Trump is now foundering on accusations and proven accusations as he's not much of a manager. Beyond that, I'm not going to speculate on how the Filipinos are going to enjoy having this guy as their president.
All right. We expressed earlier our apologies to the fact that we haven't shed a lot of light, for instance, on the Spanish elections that happened last Sunday. A lot of news has been overshadowed by the Brexit vote. And Ambag Ameri, what's one story that's stuck out in your mind this week?
Well, I'm not alone here because my colleague on the panel picked the same story, and that was the decision by the U.S. Defense Department to allow transgender soldiers to serve openly in the military. That came down, I believe, on Tuesday. And pardon me, the whole week has been nothing but London and Brexit. So if I've got the date wrong, I apologize. But the fact is that when the U.S. military makes a statement like that, it tends to lead social acceptance. The military, for example, was quite early to integrate blacks and whites back in the Vietnam era, and it was also it was fairly early in allowing women in leadership positions. It was not quite so ahead of the curve on gay soldiers, but once Don't Ask, Don't Tell was eliminated, things happened pretty fast. This is a huge moment for acceptance of trans people in America.
So, Claude Guibert, you were recently covering the primary campaign in Texas. So do you have a sense that when it comes to social issues like this one, social values, America's changing?
America might have to change because 3 weeks ago there was this mass shooting in Orlando that targeted people from the LGBTQ community. And I think it was such a shock for a lot of people that this is an issue that has to be addressed for the coming elections. I was very shocked when I was in Orlando just after the shooting. On the day after the shooting, there was this trans lady I've met. She was mourning and crying. It was just 24 hours after the shooting. She was telling me she came to Orlando to live openly, her, sexual life and gender. She was from Kentucky, where when she was at high school, she was harassed. She was physically abused. She told me that one day someone tried to put fire to her hair, and one day they even tried to hang her. She was at the Pulse nightclub when the shooting occurred. I think all these stories, that were told during that tragedy, these parents who found out on the day they found out their child was killed. Some of them found out their children was gay and they didn't even know that before. Some people knew their child was gay and rejected them. And one day, they were grieving because their kid was killed and they rejected him before. All these stories are shaking, I think, the American society. I hope it's going to shake them because there are issues that has to be addressed. And as you said, the moves made by the army are the one who might lead the whole society.
Who might lead it. Very briefly, because we're almost out of time. Patrick Smith, one story that we should be watching out for.
I think the Austrian election appeal and the success in the far-right candidate by challenging it is going to makes this election, if they're going to rerun it makes it a real test of sentiment across Europe.
Aaron Zaleski?
I don't know if this is something to be followed, but it's more a bit of a science trivia. The hole in the ozone layer is closing. And according to scientists, by 2050, it will be completely healed. And they're attributing that to the Montreal Protocol in '87, which banned the use of chlorofluorocarbons in aerosol cans and refrigerators.
CPCs.
So that's
It
good.
worked.
That's
It
good.
worked.
It actually
Hooray for the
worked.
Canadians.
Aaron Zaleski, finishing on a positive note. Many thanks for that. I want to thank Patrick Smith, Anne Bagameri, and Claude Guibal. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James. Emma, I got to confess, this panel has not been particularly kind to Justice Minister Michael Gove.
I don't think anyone is being very kind to Michael Gove right now. In fact, I'm not sure that they ever have been. If we take a look at what the Washington Post has to say on this one, because, of course, Michael Gove has now officially thrown his hat into the ring to be the man to lead the UK out of Europe. But they say after Brexecution, the man who betrayed Boris Johnson speaks out. What they say is that despite staging a political ambush that reshaped the race to be Britain's next Prime Minister, Michael Gove says he acted out of conviction, not ambition. Not something that many people believe, frankly. However, if you look on social media, there is one thing in particular that people seem to be mocking and taking a particular interest, and it is the fact that Michael Gove doesn't seem to be able to clap like a normal human being.
Oh, no.
Amazingly, when you start searching Gove, you immediately get suggestions, do you want to look at Gove clap? And it would appear that people do.
Over and over and over.
Exactly. Tweets far and wide on this one. Gove's new campaign slogan, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. My God, no, not like that. What are you doing? Shortlist has even written an article on how to clap like Michael Gove, which for some reason isn't coming up right now. But what they say, it is a very mean article, it has to be said, and I don't know why we're not able to see it. It is very below the belt. They point out that he doesn't even know how to drink either. Because he tends to sort of try and push a huge amount of his mouth into his glass. It's very odd. But as this Twitter user pointed out, the Sun refused to back Ed Miliband for Prime Minister. If you remember 2015, he was the Labour leader, due to the way he ate a sandwich, but may back Michael Gove despite his inability to clap. Now, if you've forgotten about Ed Miliband and his unfortunate bacon butty incident, that is the front page the day before the general election last year. And he was having a bit of difficulty, people basically making out that it showed he wasn't a common real down-to-earth man because he couldn't eat a bacon sandwich. It's all very strange. One last word on this one. In hindsight, I think Ed Miliband ate that bacon sandwich with a serene dignity we have now lost forever.
Oh, dear. Eating also was an issue, I know, in the U.S. Election. On a more serious note, the commemoration 100 years ago today, the start of the Battle of the Somme, 30,000 UK and Commonwealth soldiers died on the first day.
It is just unbelievable, the figures involved in this. I mean, even the first 6 minutes, it was 30,000, I think, overall were killed. 19,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers on the day. And lots of people paying tribute in the usual way. John Nichol, former RAF airman who was himself shot down and captured, you may remember, during the Gulf War. He's posted images from the trenches saying it's difficult to comprehend the fear and courage at the Battle of the Somme 100 years ago. Others choosing to show us some other interesting and unusual insights. Peter Allen pointing out that Adolf Hitler was a veteran of the Battle of the Somme, and he actually went back and visited those trenches in 1940. But there is something going on in the United Kingdom that really seems to have captured imaginations in the way that these organised memorials just don't. It is a very different kind of memorial. Basically, thousands of men in the United Kingdom have dressed up as First World War soldiers and gone out onto the streets, gone to train stations, gone to town centres, village halls, everywhere. And they are standing silently, but handing out these cards to people, and every card bears the name of one of the 19,240 British and Commonwealth soldiers who died on that first day. The hashtag that's being used is "We Are Here." And the reason for that is a song that used to be sung in the trenches, which some of these mock soldiers were singing today. I don't know if we're able to hear this video, but people have been actually crying and really, really emotional about what they've seen, because the sound of this echoing through a train station, you imagine it in the trenches 100 years ago, it really has made people very emotional and really put into perspective the whole Brexit row.
All right, yeah, a lot at stake then, and perhaps not the same sort of stakes, but certainly a lot of uncertainty now. Emma, James, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.